I'm Josh Liston from On the Bubble podcast, an oral history of television fandom, part of the GonnaGeek network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other awesome geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 295 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we continue our podcast media host discussion reviewing RSS.com.
But first, in this week's Better Podnerings, topics include a quick update from me about my Mac and a follow-up about IAB guidelines, plus there's a big change with them.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we're calling on you to help a listener be more social.
Lauren, help us be more social by starting the show now.
This is Better Podcasting. We are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast.
Welcome to episode 295 of Better Podcasting. I am Steven, and I am pleased to say SP is back from his trip and he is here.
I had a wonderful time in Florida. I was there for work, but it might as well have been a vacation because I was doing all the rocket scientist stuff that I love to do. And after that, I just needed to get home to get on this podcast because I'm sad to say it, but I miss Steven so much that I had to come back and retarget his house for space debris.
I'm just curious, is there an NDA that covers the fact that you were actually secretly out there to consult with Disney World to start the podcast exhibit?
Unfortunately, I wanted to go over to Disney, right? But unfortunately, I was so packed with time. I should have stayed an extra couple of days to make my way over to Orlando. But no, I was over in Port Canaveral, Cape Canaveral area. And I just really liked and enjoyed that. Matter of fact, now I want to move there. So we'll have to discuss how that's going to affect our podcasting here.
Any Eastern time is the same Eastern time to me, as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. But I mean, depending on when the launches occur, doesn't mean it doesn't matter if I'm working it or not. I'm going to be out there watching it because the beach is the best place to watch launches out there.
That's fine. Podcast on the beach. That'll work.
Okay, sure. Not exactly what I was thinking of. We'll have to discuss this later. Hey, by the way, talking about podcasting from the beach, I was wondering, how is your podcasting going from your office with your new gear?
It's going pretty well. Pretty well. Let's start off with my Mac update. That was a nice segue, by the way, so I'll awkwardly call it out. Yeah, I have a bit of an update here. If you didn't know, a few weeks back, I decided to try jumping into the Mac world, and I talked all the technical details over on the GonnaGeek show. But if you don't want to listen to that, because I understand you can only listen to one episode of me per week, that's fine. Come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord, and I'm happy to chat all the technical decisions that I made with that. But I have been using it as my daily driver, and the first thing I wanted to note right away is, yes, I'm using 16 gigs of RAM. That's one of the options I went with, and I'm pretty confident in my assessment now that I am somehow being limited to about 80%-ish of it being used. There's something going on in the software, I'm pretty sure, where it's doing probably some disk swaps and other things like that to make it all happen, because that's consistently where I am at. In fact, when I was editing last week, I was showing at about 80%, and then I closed DaVinci Resolve, and I was still around 80%, telling me that there must have been something that was temporarily stored on the disk or something like that. So anyways, probably room to go up, but I want to keep going and see. Maybe Mac is efficiently holding that 16 gigs, but I have had a couple of weird slow starts with some apps, which I suspect is related to that. So I wanted to give that note about that. The second thing is I'm pretty sure I'm going to go and buy an ID3 tagger. I was having issues finding an ID3 tagger, and I ended up finding that MP3 tag is available for $29 Canadian, and it really works very similarly to what I have come to know on Windows, so I'll probably buy that. I've used the trial so far, and I like that I can lay it out as I want. I can put what fields from the extended tags that I want on the main screen, because I do use some of those extended tags So really, I can rearrange it as I want. So I'm probably going to go that way. And then a while ago, I mentioned, unrelated to any of this, that in the Rodecaster Pro app, if you go on Windows, I said if I went and I took the SD card out of my Rodecaster Pro, shoved it into my computer, and then started the Rodecaster Pro companion app, I could then go and stitch together and separate out those polywave files that I hate so much using the app. And there was a question that we had: is this Windows only? Is it Mac inclusive? Well, it works the same way on Mac as it does on Windows. So that was something that I can confirm. I was able to take the SD card out, shove it into the SD card reader, open up the Rode Companion app, and right away in the area where you see all your podcasts, it just showed up in there, and I was off to the races to separate and stitch those stupid polywave files. So, hey, there you go. Those are your quick few updates that I just wanted to give. Not spend too much time on it. And if you'd like to have other discussions, like I said, come to our Discord, because I will chat more about this. There are some other learnings in a channel that we've set up over there. Just come on over and we'll point you that direction if you have some questions.
And by off to the races, are you referring to the fact that you are going to the Kentucky Derby, which is tomorrow as we record this?
No, I'm not.
Bummer. So we have a couple of updates on various things in addition to Steven's Mac. The first of which is Apple Podcasts. Now, I was informed about this on our Discord server by Randy Walker. He posted on there, and I thought it was something that he did, but no, it was for everybody, because I got about 12 different notifications in my various emails that Apple Podcasts has a unavailability time. So here's the statement. Dear podcast creator, on May 11th, starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Daylight Savings Time, Podcast Connect from Apple will be unavailable for up to 2 hours. Access to Apple Podcast Connect and Analytics will not be available during this time. Steven, do you have any more information on this? I mean, can you publish podcasts at that time? I mean, what does this mean?
My assumption, because this is, I think, the second one within the course of like a month's time, my assumption is that when it comes back up, it will be called iPodcasts. That's my assumption.
Oh, iPodcasts. iPodcasts on the iPod.
Yep, that's my assumption. Sticking to it.
Yeah, okay. What would be cool is if they had, I was thinking about this, if they had iPods integrated into the AirPods now.
Oh, that would be
like
cool.
The AirPods actually storing the data. So
yeah, it's probably just basic maintenance. Let's be real here, but who knows? We can start rumors however we'd like.
Hashtag rumors. We also have a couple of not rumors, but IAB updates. First of all, Pod News reported that the IAB released version 2.2 of the podcast measurement guidelines. It's actually the first set of new guidelines in over 3 years. Pod News itself created a comparison document to go between 2.1 and 2.2, and there was a change that is notable. Quote, to claim compliance with these guidelines, an organization must go through the IAB Tech Lab certification process and get listed on the IAB Tech Lab website. Interesting, Stephen. They're starting to crack down on who can use the terms and how.
Yeah, we'll just see how they skirt that next, because that's always been the thing. We've talked about this before, that is a little confusing. I'm glad that they're doing this, because I think that might make a couple of players stop it, but I think some of the smaller hosts, you'll probably still see them say something to the effect of that, because it's always been a thing. They're not IAB certified. They're just aiming to work in the same way as the guidelines outline, but I don't know how much of a change we'll see, but I am actually glad to see that they're at least making this clear.
All right. In addition to that, we also heard news from Pod News about Spotify pulling out of the IAB. Now, Spotify had claimed that they were IAB certified, and they actually went through the process at some point in time as Spotify, but it also covers Anchor, Megaphone, and all the other, I believe Chartable is a Spotify company. And the question is, what exactly happened? And I don't think they pulled out. I just think they ceased its membership. And it might have been due to all of the firings that occurred. And I don't know if it's Spotify trying to cut costs and not incur the cost, or if they had fired the people that were actually in charge of this, so it was incidental. I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think anybody does. But Spotify did have a statement as Pod News requested it. And did you have a chance to read the statement?
Yes, they said Spotify values our long-standing partnership with the IAB for 2024. We're taking a pause to make sure that we can participate in an active way and will reevaluate a formal membership later this year. In the meantime, Spotify remains committed to the IAB mission. We champion its efforts and remain deeply connected to the work supporting digital advertising without direct membership this year. While Megaphone Chartable and S4P, Spotify for Podcasters, are not officially IAB certified at this time, all three platforms are compliant to the IAB version 2.1 standard, end quote.
There's that statement, right? That they can't make with version 2.2.
Yeah.
They are compliant. I have a couple of thoughts here. The first thought is that, what does this really mean for hobby podcasters? Hobby podcasters aren't necessarily interested in the marketing, the digital advertising space, because for the most part, most hobby podcasters can't get enough downloads to actually be relevant in that area, right? To make enough money. Yeah, it might be a few bucks here and there, but it's not going to be like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that you're talking about if you're a hobby podcaster, more than likely. I don't know the percentages, but I think we're in the 98, 99% that it's just not relevant for. The other thought is, since Spotify has now left, and they're talking about coming back in, but since Spotify has left, what kind of domino effect is this going to have in the industry? Because it might prove that you don't need to have IAB certification in order to have a monetization program, which is what these businesses care for. So I was wondering what happened with the other podcast media host services. Well, we have some answers to that. And the first one is Podbean has been also removed from the list of IAB compliant companies. They were last certified in 2020. The IAB's compliance certification guide states that a company must submit for certification at least once in the past 12 months. So they probably didn't do that since they were last certified in 2020. So the IAB officially removed them. And then also Libsyn was recertified under version 2.1. And then talking about others, Captivate and Buzzsprout were last certified under version 2.0 in 2020, but both companies are in the process of recertification. This is all from Pod News, by the way. I didn't go out to the individual companies and ask this. Now, while the IAB doesn't publish the costs for undergoing podcast measurement certification, as a member, it costs $12,500 for a new certification. If you're renewing, it's about half that at $6,250. And this is US dollars. It's not Canadian dollars. Non-members have to pay, and I don't know what a membership costs, but non-memberships have to pay $17,500 for a new certification, and half of that, again, for the renew at $8,750. In terms of podcast media host services, I don't think that's all that much money, but it is money. So it's like you take a look at a individual and their salary. That's, I don't know, a fifth of that, a tenth of that. So yeah, it's like a license, basically, like a software license. It's not that much.
Yeah, I think that you're probably going to, well, here's my speculation about Spotify. I think number one, what's their driving reason that they'd want to keep it in there? Where do they benefit? The only real, like they have Spotify for podcasters. That doesn't matter to them as far as any revenue goes, any IAB certification, anything like that. Just with all the changes they've made, they've dumped the majority of their exclusive content that might have mattered before, and anything that they still have in its own name will attract advertising. So why do they need to be IAB certified? So I think that that's probably a big thing. Not to mention, maybe there are some things in there about they don't have the right people to actually process the certification method because they fired them all. But I do think that there's no motivation for them. And then I think Podbean's probably in a similar boat where what is their driving reason to stay in there and spend that money every year and stay invested in there? They probably know that or have recognized that some other players in the media host space aren't being certified and they're still being successful and growing. So they're of their own name, being able to attract people over there. The market has changed as far as what people are looking for in media hosts. And so I think you're probably going to see more and more media hosts being less interested in this. That's my theory.
I think so as well. I mean, we've been predicting it for months, so I agree with that. And then just so everybody's on the same page, we probably should have put this at the top. There is a difference between compliant and certification. So let's go over the definitions. This is from Pod News. I thought that they were good enough definitions, so we'll just roll with it. IAB certification is a detailed process and ensures that the IAB have checked and verified each podcast hosting company's code for the various items that they're certified for, which can be downloads, but it can also be ad delivery, whether an ad was actually delivered to a listener. There's no way to check on whether it's been listened to or not, but you can check to see if it's been actually delivered. So that's certification. It's a detailed process. The IAB has verified that their code is actually valid. The IAB compliant is just when your company wants to claim that you're compliant, then you can do so. Nobody checks. And while you might believe that you're compliant, since nobody has checked, you might be entirely wrong. So that's the verbiage from Pod News there. You might be entirely wrong. Yes, absolutely. And now I will add that with version 2.2, you can't claim that you're compliant according to their guidelines. So we'll see how this affects everybody in the coming months. Anyway, Stephen, that's a lot that's occurred in the last couple of weeks, but we've got some reviewing to do.
All right, today we're going to be reviewing the media host service called RSS.com. And before we get into this, let's just start by saying, as we talk about RSS in this segment, we're talking about RSS.com, okay? We're not talking about a RSS feed, we're talking about RSS.com. So let's put that out right away, along with a disclaimer we're going to give you right away, because we do want to give a disclaimer for today's review. In the process of this review, SP ended up running into some issues with the import function, and we will come back to this a little bit later. But during the troubleshooting for this, he had a couple of conversations and some communications with the folks over at RSS, and they had some kind things to say. We're not going to give specifics from these emails because we haven't asked for permission to share, but we will say that in these emails, it became very clear that they had been, for what we believe to be legitimately following Better Podcasting for a while. And footnote, through these emails, of course, your efforts over on r/podcasting SP did become apparent that I think they probably had found Better Podcasting through your efforts over there. So we should give that disclaimer there. And during these discussions, SP, you were extended what we'll just say to be likely above normal level of support and promotional offer. And we wanted to disclose this up front. With that said, we do hope to stay neutral with this, and we're going to summarize based off of none of those considerations. And we're going to be pretty confident in our ability to do this for a few points that we want to highlight right now about how we work behind the scenes when putting together these reviews.
First, we'll mention that aside from being CC'd on some emails between myself and RSS.com, Stephen has had zero direct contact with that company to date. This factor is relevant because we each go through independent processes to review the media hosts each week. And part of this involves validating each other's feedback. Expanding on this, we'll provide a little bit further behind the scenes of how we've been working on our show document creation each episode as we go through these reviews. First, on a basic criteria evaluation level, we have the criteria that we outlined in a table. Now, in this table, we have a column for each of us to go through the items line by line. So there's 3 columns. There's the actual criteria in the left column. Steven has the middle column. I have the right column. It's been standard since we started. This allows us both to have input and verify the media hosts stick against our criteria. And as we form the commentary for the discussion, we also each review the entire document and discuss any differences in opinions for our talking points. And I can confirm that we have not had 1 week to date where we haven't had some level of discussion on a point where it fits, and sometimes even seen things from a different point of view, which has all been valid along the way. This discussion is a key factor that allows us to validate each other's commentary and for better podcasting to have a singular voice. This week is no different. We'll both be reviewing each other's commentary, keeping an extra eye open for bias. But as always, if you have any questions or feedback about something, we'd like you to let us know and ask further. And just to show an example up front on our attempt to remove any bias, that import problem that Steven mentioned that I had, that's going to go in our shortcomings section. We're going to expand on that later. But bottom line up front, as we go through this review, we hope that it'll become quickly apparently that we did check any potential bias at the door.
All right, let's start off with the origins of RSS, because there is a blog available over on rss.com/blog/the-history-of-RSS-podcasting. Quote, imagine for a moment launching a business with a partner you've never actually met in real life. Now imagine doing it as a passion project while maintaining a full-time job. That's exactly how the co-founders of our podcasting hosting started. Alberto Batella and Benjamin Richardson built and launched RSS.com from 2 different continents without meeting in person for 3 full years, end quote. That's from their blog. And if you're not getting why we're quoting that whole big paragraph, because doesn't that sound a little familiar, SP?
It does, except for it's been longer than 3 years for us. We never actually met in person. I have met your brother, but I haven't met you.
And 1 continent, okay? Let's say that as well.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. 2 different countries, but 1 continent. Now, separately, Alberto launched a service called Podcast Generator in 2006, and it operated up until 2017. Benjamin was an entrepreneur who acquired the domain rss.com in June of 2013, hoping to cash in on that sweet.com bubble, but never quite took off due to the advent of microblogging sites and the decrease of emphasis on RSS through blogs and websites, not podcasting. So fast forward to 2017, Ben and Alberto forged a partnership between rss.com and the Podcast Generator service. And the service that we know today as rss.com was born on January 29th, 2018. In 2020, it was a banner year for rss.com, and they came out with their 2nd generation of their platform. It was released then, along with monetization options. In August of 2021, Ben and Alberto actually met for the first time at Podcast Movement. And hey, I was there too. I probably ran into them, at least in the hallways or somewhere along the line. Since then, RSS has continued to develop and explore the podcasting space to maximize it for their users. Now, for this review, I began, and we'll get to this later, by importing my show that I had hosted on Transistor. In full disclosure, this show was one that I have received permission by the owner to use in these tests. Now, during the process of the import, I ran into several issues. Again, we'll come back to that later. And in full disclosure, I had never redirected the feed that is on rss.com from Transistor due to all the issues I encountered. Simply put, I'm still running that show on the transistor.com RSS feed. I have not changed over the show to rss.com from Transistor.
Now, for me, I continued on my way I've been going by creating a new blank account, creating a new blank show, and just going from there. And I found that setup was fairly easy. Entered an email address, received a code, then went and set up a password, and then was right there in the creation of the podcast. Now, let's get a potential shortcoming out of the way up front, because to us, it does appear that RSS has a 1-episode trial. So in that process of setting up, I was able to set up without actually entering any payment information and was able to publish 1 episode. There were some restricted features, but overall it did function properly. But when trying to publish a 2nd episode, that was when I was required to sign up for a subscription, and the subscriptions don't appear to have any formal trial period. So if this is something that you're going to do, just know that there is no official trial period, but you can try it enough for 1 episode. And we had at least 1 past media host that we've dealt with operate in a sort of similar fashion. So they're not out of the norm on this entirely, but you also can't have a so many day free trial to really give it a shakedown.
All right, let's get into the highlights, and we're going to start with so many of our highlights, and that is the 301 redirect. Yes, RSS.com has a redirect option, but where they get extra points here compared to a few of the other past reviews that we did is they make it really obvious. Under the settings in the dashboard, there is a clear header called redirect, and they make the intention very clear. This is directly on the website in the dashboard. Quote, at rss.com, you have full control over your content and are free to redirect your show's RSS feed to a different hosting provider, unquote. Also, of a related note, there is an option to delete the podcast altogether. Next up, we'll talk about affordability. And I think Stephen and I are squarely in agreement on this. We're going to give this a 4 out of 5. And why is that, Stephen?
Although there are some free options out there in the media host space, there's a pretty big win in the whole vague term of affordability when looking at the feature set here for RSS.com, especially when we consider that there's a desired feature that I alluded to a little while ago as far as pricing goes. We'll come back to that in a minute. First, for the base price point plan, it's $14.99 per month. Now, for hobby podcasters, this probably would fit quite a bit for you, and this is the base price, and that's definitely cheaper than some of the other options we've discussed. There's unlimited episodes, unlimited audio, audio to video conversion, episode transcripts, cross-platform analytics, monetization via sponsors, RSS feeds for your podcast, websites for your show, custom embedded player, episode scheduling, auto submission, automatic distribution, Apple Podcast subscription support, social media sharing, and, quote, 24/7 customer support, end quote. So that's the feature set that they list under the $14.99 per month plan. But here's where things change a little bit, because you know how we said that there's a thing that I kind of wanted to see? They do it, which is the price point of having a marginal increase in your price point to get some extra features that might be enticing. I think this is a big missed opportunity that I've seen on a lot of other media hosts to maybe encourage people to spend a few more bucks. And when you spend an extra $5 and go up to the $19.99 per month plan, you gain some features that might actually work well for hobby podcasters, including unlimited podcasts. And this is something where I think there's a good chance a lot of hobby podcasters would spend that money because they might have more than one podcast. And so for an extra $5 a month, they get up to that. And then if you're into the money thing, you also have the opportunity with that to get the dynamic ad insertion for high traffic shows, they say, on the $19.99 per month plan. So I think of the unlimited podcast, though, that's the enticing thing there. And that's where I look at it and I go, as far as the term affordable goes, for an extra $5 a month, you've got everything under the sun there as far as all of your podcasts that you want, with the asterisks that we'll come back to in a little bit.
We will. Also, I'm going to mention that they offer a more limited plan for students and NGOs at $4.99 per month. This does not include any monetization. There's supposedly reduced customer support at that level, but it's of note. We brought it up with another podcast media host service before, and I think this is great, especially for students. Because if you're in college, that's one of the impediments. That's what drove a lot of people to Anchor.fm at the time, and now Spotify for podcasters, because it's free, and they just couldn't afford any more per month. I think this is a smart move on their part. And the payment types is just credit cards. There's no Bitcoin or anything else involved. Now, we're also pleased to report for a very limited set of podcast media host providers, if you are somebody looking for podcasting 2.0, RSS.com gets a glowing pass on this, right, Stephen?
Yeah, because not only do they support an abundance of Podcasting 2.0 features, which include soundbite, TXT, location, value for value, chapters, lock, unlock, author, live item, trailer, person, content, link, license, and podcast GUI, they also make it super clear in the dashboard which of these features actually are part of the Podcast 2.0. When you're going through the dashboard and you see a feature, there's a little 2.0 indicator in there. So we've been on the hunt to find somebody that fully supports 2.0, and it looks like they are right in there. Now, that might not matter for you, but this is something that does matter for some people, which is why we've been keeping an eye out for it.
Speaking of help, their help system is in the highlights section. Every time we wanted to look for clarification about something, it seemed like there was an article that was easily findable in their help. But more than that, the system they use seems to actually present relative associated articles in the sidebar. Multiple times in Stephen's case, he'd had to search for one thing, find the article, and then be interested in the results on the right-hand side, as they did feel associated with the main reason he was searching for the first. Now, from the customer support perspective, because I had an extensive time with this, I did unfortunately run into a major import issue that was part of RSS.com's issue, and part of the issue was actually the originally produced files. We'll get into that in a second. The response time was on the order of once a day. Plus, the issue turned into an extremely technical issue for RSS.com that they went out of their way to help resolve. I did eventually provide the information to them to help them diagnose. So any delay there was on me, and that was several days. I'm not going to count that against them. But the interactions were all very helpful and with a lot of relevant information. So kudos to the RSS.com team for figuring everything out. But I will say it did take a week to work through it. They don't say it's the norm. We'll get into more of that later when we talk about the actual import issues.
Now, from a strictly upload file type perspective, they do get a pass because they accept WAV, MP3, AAC, AIFF, MP4, M4A, FLAC, OGG, and MKV. Now, there is an asterisk on this that, again, we'll come back to.
For the podcast distribution, RSS.com has the main sites that we're looking for, and they do a good job of categorizing them between destinations that can be automatically set up and the ones that need to have work done on your part. So there is Spotify, Amazon Music, Samsung Podcasts, Podcast Index, Listen Notes, and RSS.com. But they have guided tutorials for Apple Podcasts, Pandora, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Deezer. On the $19 a month plan, you can also link to YouTube to convert your audio file to video on YouTube. That's what we've been talking about. If you're into money, they do have a couple of options available, although the donation button is just for linking to an external site, whether that's Patreon, Coffee, or whatever. They are into the Podcasting 2.0 features and offer that vaunted value for value support, and they offer sponsors through Podcorn. And in the $19 a month plan, there is dynamic ad insertion, as Stephen mentioned before. And lastly, for a simple highlight, since we mentioned it, we'd start looking into this. They do support seasons, although there may be a caveat about believing in them a little bit too much. We're going to come back to that later. And Stephen, that's about it for the highlights.
Yeah, because now we're going to move into the neutral section, things that are not shortcomings, they're not highlights, they're right in the middle. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the whole important aspect to a podcaster that they're going to use every single week or episode that they upload. It's the user interface, because we're going to give this a 3 out of 5. Overall, we found the user interface easy to navigate, pages felt well balanced, and we were easily able to find different settings that we were looking for. Although it wasn't the most modern feeling interface that we've reviewed to date, pages that did have multiple fields seemed well balanced. They utilize different sizes of fields and buttons and other layout methods to not make multiple fields feel overwhelming. But the biggest strike that we had for RSS with the interface comes from the upload method, because the upload method felt a little cumbersome. There was a 3-step process to upload. On the first page, you do the usual things you'd think to do when you're uploading. You'd fill out the episode details and you'd select the file that needed to be uploaded. But then you end up needing to press save draft, to which at this point, the file's actually being uploaded. You then have to wait for the file to be uploaded and the page to tell you it's been uploaded and processed. We will come back to the processing a bit later. And then at that point, you can publish. This means that any potential checks that they might put are happening after you selected the file. So if you realize that there's an error, you have to then go back a step again to that first page to edit and go through the process again. It really does make it feel unnecessarily long, rather than just processing the file once you click upload and work in one page there.
Yeah, additionally, the main page that lists the episode details feels a little bit confusing. There are some icons for each file for adding a transcript, adding chapters, generating a YouTube video from audio, but these icons feel unnecessarily small, and given the large amount of white space they're surrounded by, probably could be clearer or bigger. Overall, the interface seems optimized for a mobile experience. We've seen this before with several of the other podcast media host services that we've already reviewed, and it's a great thing for checking things on the fly, but we still have to ask, is there really a market for mobile podcast production in 2024? I think it's just limited to checking things on the fly, but I might be wrong. So if you're listening to this and you produce your show on a mobile device, a tablet or a smartphone, let us know, because I want to know what the percentage of market is for that.
Now, talking about the provided website, we'll say it's fine. It's like some of these other ones we've seen. It's not really customizable. It's pretty to look at. It really lands more in the realm of offering a landing page on rss.com rather than a full generalized podcasting website. And this does seem supported by the fact that one of the blocks that we found in the setting is a link to a custom website. So if you have an independent website, you can add that in there. That indicates that they know some people will probably be wanting to do that. Basically, it just feels like you want something basic that is on rss.com. This is what you use. Otherwise, you want to look elsewhere.
And then for the embed player, we'll throw that into the neutral category as well. On the pro side of things, the embed player looks attractive by default. It's of reasonable size. And when generating the embed code, it offers some customability with color. You can do the light dark thing. On the con side, it would be nice to be able to get the settings overall based on the show, not just when generating the embed code. It's also lacking playback speed and the ability to customize what icons are on it. It definitely looks better than some that we've seen already, but it's pretty rigid. It's basically just fine, which is why it's in the neutral zone versus the highlights or the shortcomings. Stephen, I'm going to move on to the shortcomings now. And I'm going to have to start with the import functionality. You agree with that one?
Well, we've mentioned it like 4 times, so go ahead.
Yeah. This is probably one of the most frustrating import process situations that we've run into to date. And it's mostly been me doing the import from show to show. So it's definitely one of the most frustrating processes. Now, through my discussions after when the problem presented itself, we found out that currently rss.com has a manual review process for importing shows. Upon the customer support dialogue, RSS claimed this was due to a high number of requests, and they were averaging about 3 days of wait time. I had about 4 for mine. RSS told me a few times that they're working on an automated solution at the moment, but manual review is what they have for now. This is to ensure no podcast is being stolen by just importing the RSS feed. That's why that lock on lock tag is so important, by the way. And it might not be somebody just stealing your show. It might be them stealing the episodes to then put on other monetizable platforms. And if you're monetizing, That's an issue. So this is a real issue that they're running into, but 3 to 4 days is extensive based on other processes that I've done. And it was at this time when I mentioned this frustration on Reddit, on r/podcasting on Reddit, which, full disclosure, I'm a moderator over there, but I was just responding to a post over there. I stated that I was not really comfortable with the RSS. I don't remember the exact words, but it had to do with the RSS.com import. Alberto was actually in Reddit at the time in that thread, and he contacted me directly due to that comment on the import issues. So I got an email from him. And then after a little joint troubleshooting, the technical issues seemed to stem from the original encoding of the files by the original producer of the show. I've stated several times that I have not touched these shows, that I would not have encoded the shows at 80 kilobytes per second, but it was something else than that. The original producer was experimenting with Sound Booth at the time in 2016, and these were some of the episodes that were affected that I was trying to import from Transistor to RSS.com. I confirmed this through text message with the original producer of the show. We actually have a good relationship. And RSS stated that the encoding issue was related to the embedded episode art, and that it was something that just didn't go through their trouble checkers along the way. However, I'll point out that Transistor didn't have any issues originally publishing the episodes, but RSS.com did. This might be, and I haven't confirmed this with RSS.com or not, because Transistor did not re-encode the files. We talked about that during our Transistor review, but we know that RSS, we haven't talked about it yet, but RSS.com does re-encode the files. So maybe it was because they were taking the original file and trying to re-encode it, and they ran into the problem there. RSS.com did offer to code in a global pass-through setting for the show to make sure that the files would make it through the checker that they have before it is re-encoded. Now, I declined this. I don't know if they did it or not, but I declined this because I can just use my ID3 editor to retag the affected files myself. Now, while I did enjoy the direct interaction and troubleshooting with the RSS team, likable people, this process failed our expectations for now, and we look forward to revisiting this criteria once their automated system is put in place. And just spell something out clearly, we don't think a manual review process is scalable when maintaining a good customer experience unless you have a decent support team employed across multiple time zones. As far as the preventing stolen podcast thing goes, Stephen, you have a few thoughts here.
I really think that the whole idea of having these theft prevention devices on RSS import is really just the equivalent of using a locking gas cap on your car. It's going to stop the lazy thieves, but the slightly determined folks are going to figure out a way to do it with minimal effort. All they'll do in this situation is create something that independently scrapes the content and publishes it back up, whether it is through something that is screen manipulation or whatever. They'll find a way. We once had the GonnaGeek site cloned and scraped by a bad actor, and if people are doing that and making money doing that on a website side of things, I don't see why they won't do similar things for podcasting. So I just think the whole idea of manual review is getting the low-hanging fruit, and that's about it.
Okay. So let's move on. And we've gone past the importing your show or creating your show to begin with. And it's out there and people are starting to listen to it or download it or consume it. One of the things you're probably going to be looking for several times a day is analytics, right, Stephen?
Yeah, and for this, we are putting this in the shortcomings for the overall analytics, because although the key metrics are there for a hobby podcaster to view the overall trends of their podcast to see if they're growing, we do think there's some shortcomings on the individual episode side of things. Starting with the pluses, we do like how the analytics, you can see some information such as the downloads categorized by day 1, 3, 7, 30, 70, and 90. So real easy way to see when your traffic's happening. There's also an easy way to see the location map as far as a heat map goes, seeing where your downloads are coming from. It's really quick visual. There's also a heat map to see things for the time of day and the week. So there's a little bit of table. And at first glance, in a heat map fashion, you can see when the hotspots are for downloads. And you can also export these analytics by CSV. But the real downside on this is that all these nice things are really overall podcast based. So when you go to the analytics, you will see these overall trends. And on your main episode view, you can see the different basic show statistics. So like the number of downloads per episode. But if you want to try to dig into these trends per episode, they don't exist. The other strike against them is we don't really know if there's anything to do with IAB, because on their help portion, they talk about the benefit of the IAB technical guidelines, but don't clearly say that they follow them. So that in itself pretty clearly indicates that they're not IAB certified, and we don't even know if they're following the IAB guidelines. Even though we're not sure where it's trending, that is the thing that people are looking for right now, so that is a bit of a strike against them. So overall, it is something that we have to say the analytics are a fail for us, because they just miss as far as trying to get into the nitty-gritty of each individual episode. And that is something that we do know a lot of stats nerds like us want to do. They want to find out the trends of their individual episodes.
I kept on trying to click on the individual episodes, thinking that I can click one level deeper, and I just couldn't. So I originally thought it was a problem with my computer, and I went to the mobile site and same thing. I couldn't click to get those data. And as far as the IAB goes, I did check the IAB website. They're not listed there at all over there. So yeah, they're not part of the IAB. They could be following the intent, but you just don't know if they're actually there or not. So if that matters to you, then they're not really IAB certified. That's for sure. Okay. One thing that we've talked about throughout various different reviews is that elusive, and I will call it elusive, download button on their website for the actual podcast. Now, in the dashboard on the main website and in the embed player, there was no easy way to download the file manually. You had to grab it from the RSS feed. And I don't know about you, Stephen, but I actually copied the RSS, I put it in Chrome, and I didn't get the gobbledygook that normally shows up there. I got what looked like an actual website, but it had different players on there that you can actually click the 3 buttons and actually download the file there. So it was a little unsettling to me. Like, am I really on the RSS feed? Yes, I really was. I don't know the code that did that, but that was pretty cool. There is a share button available in the dashboard, but no download button there either. And I don't know about you, Stephen, because we didn't talk about it, but the file name was changed for me. There was a lot of gobbledygook in that file name, and my file was re-encoded from 80 kilobits per second mono to 128 kilobits per second mono. So they did re-encode my file.
And we'll expand on that again in a few minutes. I just got a whole list coming down the road here. And while we are talking about this downloadability, you might actually be wanting to download the file to do something that we do, which is, check to see what happened with your ID3 tags. And there's no ID3 tag support either on RSS.com. We didn't see any there. There was nothing in the documentation. And it says, if the validator tells you that your ID3 tag is missing, we recommend using a trusted editor to add it, which basically confirmed that there was no ID3 tag manipulation in there. But I do have to say, I specifically uploaded a file without ID3 tags, and I never saw any of that indication at all. So maybe somewhere, somehow, but I never saw that. So maybe that's I don't know, a sunset feature. That's my best guess.
Yeah, maybe it was just down that day. I don't know. Aside from being able to upload a video and have it converted to MP3 or having your audio converted to YouTube, we couldn't see any video podcasting support. So there's that. I know some people are looking for an ability to distribute a video show via RSS, and there's just not a lot of support out there. Even Spotify, we reviewed Spotify for podcasters. They do include the video, but it's only for Spotify, so they don't distribute it via RSS somewhere else. Okay. Moving on. If you've been following us all season long here on Better Podcasting, you have heard there were 2 areas that we added to our criteria just a few weeks ago. The ability to return an episode back to draft is one. And the second one is the ability to modify a publishing date. And we can report that RSS fails both of these. For the date aspect, we wanted to talk about how a podcaster might want to insert a different date to replace a file or to add one earlier on, such as perhaps at the beginning of a season or show to help give context to what's to come. And when searching the help docs, the RSS.com had a page dedicated to changing the order of the episodes, and they suggested changing the episode number and the season number to do this. That is the only method they suggested for reordering, meaning you cannot change the date. So I guess that means they believe all podcasts should have a season and episode number. And then I also, separately from Stephen, pulled up, I actually went into their help and actually typed the question, is it possible to set up a backdate for an episode? And the response here is, quote, "We are sorry, but the new platform does not allow to backdate an episode. You are able to publish your episode or schedule the episode in the future," unquote. And this is where I ran into my issue, because when I attempted to publish the next episode in the feed, which incidentally was episode 16, I could not backdate the episode to 2016. And it was at that point, and this is the only time that this has happened so far, it was at that point that I decided not to forward the RSS to RSS.com, and I just kept it on Transistor because I just didn't want to deal with having to go in later and then backdate it on the next one. And Stephen, it's just, I think I made the right decision.
I agree. I think that is a big problem that you would have been creating if you did forward it over. So I see where you're coming from, leaving the test feed on Transistor and then maybe hopping over RSS.com on the next one.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I looked at what that show would be ported into next time, and I think I won't be able to do it with that either. And and that's a special case. We'll talk about that when we get to it, but I might be carrying the Transistor feed for quite some time.
All right, well, moving up on our next shortcoming, let's talk about limitations, because on first glance, the limitations on RSS.com do appear what we would say are reasonable for a hobby podcaster. However, we do take issue with an aspect of how things are presented surrounding a certain limit, and also an actual core limitation itself that we think needs to be made clearer up front. Let's get to the raw numbers first with limitations. They do limit files to a 2 gigabyte max upload, and they don't limit how many files you can upload, which is one that we've seen as well. They also don't limit the number of downloads that you get per month, but we will slap a big old moose-sized asterisk on that because we're going to come back to that. Because contrary to some of those features that we mentioned earlier that use the word unlimited, they do actually put a limit on how much your file can be downloaded from a data transfer perspective, commonly referred to as bandwidth, including in their documentation. Even though the techie folks among us might argue that the common use of the word bandwidth for data transfer is problematic, we're going to call it bandwidth for this purpose because that's what they use and that's what is a common term used. RSS, if you look at it, has a section dedicated to, quote, fair usage, end quote. And what they say is all RSS.com subscriptions receive up to 1 terabyte of bandwidth every month under our fair usage clause. And then later in there, they go on to say, we will continue distributing your podcast through our high performance content distribution network with no immediate interruption of service. However, we may reach out to discuss RSS.com's high bandwidth subscription and other options to best support your usage. And then they go on to say outbound bandwidth of over 1 terabyte will be billed at a rate of $49 per terabyte. And what they say is, quote, most podcasts and networks will never need to upgrade to the high bandwidth subscription, end quote. So for those of you that aren't following what that means, basically, you get so much that you can have your file served out there. Essentially, it's a way of counting how much data your file is sending out to the internet. That's the best way that I can think to describe bandwidth. And it's a thing that comes up all the time. Your internet provider might even have a limit on how much you can transfer every single month with your internet connection, or, on your phone. You might have a certain amount of data you're provided. That's the intention here, is they're giving you 1 terabyte for your service. How does this calculation stack up? Well, we used episode 293 of Better Podcasting, which was encoded at 128 kilobits per second mono, to do a calculation as an example.
So the file size was 93 megabytes, and we'll just say 93 megabytes. It was actually and changed, but let's just go with 93 to make things simple. And technically, 1 terabyte is 1,048,576 megabytes. Although it's common practice for people to use base 10 with these numbers, meaning 1 terabyte is actually 1 million megabytes. We don't know which one they use, so we'll just use the smaller two, and 1 terabyte will equal 1 million megabytes. So 1 million divided by 93 megabytes, which is the size of episode 293 of Better Podcasting, is 10,752 downloads. We'll get to that in a second. I want to add really quickly, it's not just the actual podcast episodes that might count on the data. It's also the RSS feed itself. Now, the RSS feed is largely text with some episode art in there, so it's not that big, but it would add up and it would reduce the total number of downloads if they count the RSS feed as also part of that bandwidth. So it's important for us to point out at this stage that the page does say, quote, all RSS.com subscriptions receive up to 1 terabyte of bandwidth, unquote. This seems to indicate that this limit is per account, meaning that if you do opt for that multiple RSS price, this limit is across all your shows. Now, in the past, we've made it clear that we're not the biggest fan of download limits. I'm certainly not. It's the whole idea of saying your baby can't grow. But we've also acknowledged that we believe many media hosts do put a carve out in terms of service for high demand shows, where if you're reaching massive download rates, you're going to get a knock at your door and the plan limits won't apply to you. Hey, sir, we need to up your hosting plan because you're taking too much data. This has been a long-standing common practice on many media hosts. Often the terms are vague on this, and it's just given a disclosure that leaves the door open for them with unknown amounts. The bottom line, data transfer costs the providers money. They have to protect themselves, and we acknowledge that. So we want to start by giving RSS credit for actually spelling out the data transfer amounts. It allows people to do the math like we just did and know what they're in store for. However, based on our math, it seems like the download limit potentially is on the low side compared to some of the other media hosts that we've reviewed so far, where they put a limit on the outright number of downloads. For example, a few weeks ago, we talked about the download limits with Transistor, and they say their limit is 20,000 per month. The biggest issue we take with this limit, and that's based on our math, the 1 terabyte data transfer limit is within the realm or lower of what we've seen where media hosts have outright imposed a download limit. Many non-techie hobby podcasters might not have the knowledge to do the math that we just did. If you're going to make a 1 terabyte a core limitation, to the point you are comfortable putting on your documentation a dollar figure associated with the overage, we'd suggest not using the term unlimited in your website and instead focus on something more easily to be understood by a non-techie user, which is the number of downloads. This would be clearer for all podcasters. And with that said, using the actual bandwidth data transfer amount is probably more fair. For example, a user who uploads a bunch of short episodes gets the same bandwidth as a user who uploads longer files. But again, which is more user-friendly limit. Bottom line, we feel the language is misleading and we'd like to see a limit of 1 terabyte added as a main bullet instead of a hover footnote under a fair usage article, just like media hosts who put the number of downloads on their main points.
Now, let's talk about one of the other big shortcomings that we had, file integrity. See, we said we'd get back to that. Because the file integrity, we will give a fail for our personal criteria. We think it's unacceptable for what we want. And we'll quote one of their help pages. At rss.com, we follow these guidelines W and automatically encode all your episode to MP3 at 128 kilobits per second, 44.1 kilohertz stereo. And yes, I said guidelines W because that's a typo on their help page.
I resisted correcting it.
This means, though, that all of those file types that we talked about earlier are converted to MP3. This is a shortcoming in itself because some people have elected to use a certain audio file type for certain reasons. Doesn't matter. It's getting converted to an MP3. And what they go on to say is if you would prefer that we not process your episodes, just upload them in MP3 format, encoded at 128 kilobits per second at 44.1 kilohertz, so your files will pass through our filters without any alteration, end quote. And they also dedicate a page to explaining the rationale, but quite honestly, their rationale is not something that we care about for our rationale because it's our file, and we are the ones that are creating the product that we are putting up on a media host. We've determined what we feel is the best encoding and the best format for our file based on what we're doing for our production. We've seen it evolve over the years with Better Podcasting. Early years of Better Podcasting, we got in disagreement with other folks in the industry who thought that you didn't really have to have anything more than 64 kilobits per second mono. That evolved with time. And also, maybe you have a show that's really driven by music. That might be something like an audio drama or a playthrough. And if that music is a key component, you might want to increase that bit rate so that you're not getting that artifacting that comes with compression with MP3s and music. There's lots of really good reasons that people might want higher than 128. And so I think that this is a big shortcoming there.
The other negative that we'll say here, or shortcoming, RSS.com does not have an all-in-one solution for recording, editing, and publishing. And for those that are longtime listeners of Better Podcasting that know how to do this all on your own and are questioning why this criteria is still there, it is largely an artifact from the Anchor.fm days. I still see several posts each week on the r/podcasting subreddit as creators are constantly looking for a replacement capability for what used to be Anchor.fm is now Spotify for podcasters, especially those creators that are unhappy with the Riverside.fm performance or cost. And Spotify for podcasters has teamed up with Riverside.fm. That's why it keeps on coming up over there. There's just an awful lot of creators that are having problems trying to replace that. And again, all of that was free on Anchor.fm. So everybody wants a free replacement, and I have yet to find one. So if you actually have one to do all that, the recording, editing, and publishing all on one platform like Anchor.fm used to be, let me know, and I would like to take a look at it. I think Podbean is as close as you can get right now, but RSS.com does not have any of that. All right, let's move on to the summary. RSS.com is by far not the worst media host provider that we've tried, but it is also not one that meets our personal criteria that we've set forth so far. And like a few of the others that we've reviewed, there are probably several types of hobby podcasters where RSS.com might be acceptable for their personal needs. And if you are okay with the limitations and processes that they have in place, go for it. And like some of those, that includes being okay with the potential download limits of the 1 terabyte bandwidth per month limit. However, putting that aside, we do think RSS.com needs to make their data transfer limit more apparent. We admit this will be acceptable for many podcasters. However, the current layout of features feels misleading. You have to hover over the info circle, as Stephen talked about, next to the words unlimited audio to see a hover box that says subject to our fair usage policy. Then you have to manage to click on the hyperlink text to get into their policy. Then you have to read the policy. Then you have to understand what 1 terabyte means. Then you have to actually do the math to see if it's okay. It just seems like if you're going to have an actual written traffic-based policy, you should make it clear, especially to a normal podcaster who may not be that familiar with the technical jargon, and definitely not just as a footnote to the word unlimited. But for us personally, we're not into that. But more importantly, we're not into their handling of the encoding of files either. We don't agree with mandatory encoding. We've said that all along with all the podcast media host providers. And we want the control to publish audio at the quality and format that we see fit for the specific episodes or podcasts that we publish. So that in itself is a showstopper for us on Better Podcasting. But even if it wasn't for the re-encoding limitation, there's lots of other issues that have come up in the shortcomings. So if they're being removed from our short list, they are for multiple reasons. The bottom line, we'll keep you informed if anything changes in the future, especially because they have told us they're constantly modernizing. So as it stands, as though their slogan may be, quote, podcasting is better with RSS.com, unquote, we say that RSS.com is not for better podcasting. And I will also end by saying, just like Buzzsprout, which a lot of people like, I like RSS.com. I like the people in the company behind RSS.com, but I'm not going to use those as a host for our podcast. And it's not going to be for better podcasting unless a lot of those items are fixed.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
All right, this week with the Better Podback, we had a couple of things that interested us from the Discord server, and the first is transcripts, because Damien the DM said, me sitting here wondering if transcripts are really worth the time to fix after getting 5 minutes in. And then Waffles ended up saying, speaking of that, ask Stephen Jondrew, have you tried the resolved transcripts yet in version 19 or anyone else with the free version? To that, I say, no, I have not, because I am a terrible individual. And to the question about fixing them, I honestly have to say, I pretty strongly believe that they fall in line with some other things that professional podcasters probably need to focus on, but hobby podcasters probably would be better served their time elsewhere. Yeah, I think that there's going to be lots of auto-generated transcripts out there. I think there's going to be lots of mistakes. And I think that the platforms that are doing this are going to get better fairly rapidly as these platforms evolve and get more content into them. So to me, I'm not spending probably any of my time trying to fix them up, just because I would rather put that time elsewhere in my podcast.
Transcripts are the worst, auto transcripts are the worst they're ever going to be today. It's only going to get better from here. And I think the only reason that I would advocate throwing in time is if you can prove to me that they're being used as searchable. Transcripts are being searchable. And if they're searchable, if you have unique terms that are not common language, that are either technical in consideration or maybe in your niche. I wanted to say geek, but in your niche, it doesn't matter what. It could be sailing, it could be gaming, it could be movie stuff, whatever it is. Let's say you're doing a podcast on Battlestar Galactica. There's just some terms in Battlestar Galactica that are unique to that and might not come through in a transcript, auto transcript. If that is true and it's searchable, you might want to go in and correct those terms. But I think that Steven's right. I think eventually it will catch up with that. The LLMs or large language models will be able to encapsulate the lexicon that's unique, the speak on the street, and they're going to be able to keep up with that given context. And I think that we're just a few months away from that, and you can just wait for that. I honestly believe it's not years, it's months that we're talking about, because these things get better all the time.
And speaking of getting your show found by different eyes, that didn't really work. Social media posts, because we had social media posts be brought up. by Original Waffles. What are y'all using? Actually, sorry. What are y'all using for scheduling social media posts? Ideally, I'd like something that can hit Twitter, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Buffer still works. Using it right now, but $5 per month per account is a bit steep.
I don't know if that's a bit steep or not. I mean, if you actually use a social media integrator or a social media consultant, you're going to be spending more than $5 a month on that. So maybe it's in the realm of being in there per account, as you say. And also, I want to say you're using Twitter, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Why are you not using Threads? I'm curious. Why are you not using Threads? Because I think Stephen and I have both fell in love with Threads and find it a good place to be. So if you have something against Meta, maybe, I guess, but why are you not using Threads? So that's my opinion, is $5 a month is okay. I don't actually have a scheduling social media post app. I just do everything by myself. And that's probably a fault because I think that you do need to promote, and especially as a hobby podcaster, and social media is one of the places that you can promote. And I think getting it at key times during the day when you might not be available, because I know Waffles works a full-time job.
Mhm.
He, unlike me, he has his phone available, but there might be stuff going on during the day that he can't like get it at those key times. So I do think it's probably something worth looking into. And with that, Stephen, do you have any suggestions?
I do not. I honestly don't. I've lost track of all of these things, especially as so many APIs that used to be so easily used have faded away or cost a lot more money.
Yeah, I think the cost is going to drive a lot of hobbyists away. But like I said, if you're have a social media consultant, I guarantee you it's going to be more than $5 per month. So if you're looking for that help, that assistance, a tool might not be bad to pay for. It just adds up over time, right? You have a podcast media host, you have different software, you have gear that you have to buy and maintain, you have air conditioning that you need to install in your house. You have stuff that you have to buy, and you get nickeled and dimed with some subscriptions. I mean, heck, I have a subscription to Discord because I use it a lot, and I want to make sure that they stay around. So I actually am grandfathered on the old plan. I don't get a lot for it anymore, but that's just an example. And I think a lot of hobbyists are like, oh, it's free. Well, I don't have to pay for it. Well, okay. Yeah, it might go away someday because it's not supported by anything, but yeah, okay.
I think that in thinking about this, what I would probably do if I found $5 a month per account too steep, I'd probably think about where is my best traction and just pay for one if you can, and just choose that social media for it if you can afford $5 a month. That's probably what I would do, unless there's an alternative that comes up. But I think that's probably what I would do if I figured $5 overall was fine.
Okay. Well, if you, listener or viewer, have any words of wisdom for us or Waffles, we'd love to hear about it. You can catch us on our Discord server, which is at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. We also have an email address, podcast@betterpodcasting.com.
So that's going to take us to the end of another episode of Better Podcasting. If you have any suggestions for media hosts, well, you better get them in quick, because I think we're getting down to the second runs here pretty soon. No, I'm just kidding. I think though, we have some that we still got to get to that actually have a big pull, but then there are some other ones that we don't often talk about that are on our list. So we would like to know which ones haven't we talked about that you would like us to talk about, because we are happy to change that order at any point to serve you, the Better Podcasting listeners and viewers.
And we'd like also to learn what you're learning from our reviews. That would be great. Hey, look, we're coming back next time. We're going to talk about another media host. We're going to have some feedback. We're going to have some news. I'm looking forward to our next episode, Stephen, which, because we're recording this late, is just in a couple of days, and I'm so excited about it.
For sure. And check out all of the awesome geeky content on the GonnaGeek network. There's lots of amazing geeky podcasts over there. Please go to GonnaGeek.com. And if you like to talk geeky stuff and podcast stuff, please come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. But that's going to go ahead and wrap it up. So for episode number 295 of Better Podcasting, I'm Steven saying thanks for everybody who watched us as we streamed on a unusual day and time. It's Friday today.
It's almost Monday. Hey, buddy. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the GonnaGeek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.